Hi, everyone. Before the episode begins, I just want to remind you to follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Marlene the Plant Lady and YouTube, Everything Gardening with Marlene Simon. And remember, please, please, please rate and review on iTunes and Spotify. That just helps the podcast get noticed by more people, and then more people will become better gardeners. And that's what we all want. So enjoy the episode.
Look at that plant. I want you to know that everything was grown in my garden. Don't touch that plant!
Is it poisonous?
She'll become part of the plant.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Flower Power Garden Hour. I'm your host, Marlene. And tonight I'm going to talk with someone that I discovered on Instagram. And I fell in love with their flowers and where they live. And I asked if she wanted to be on my podcast, and she said yes. So we're going to learn a little bit about gardening in Montana in a zone that completely different than mine. So this is Theri, and her Instagram handle is Backyard Impressions. And Theri, first of all, thank you. Second of all, please tell us your whole entire name so I do not butcher it.
Theri Vasina LHirondelle.
So you're saying l'hirondelle, that is French, but you have an interesting background. So you are of the Cree Nation, or you're Siberian, I should say.
My husband, my heritage and ancestors, my grandparents came from Russia, Siberia, in the Altai region near Kazakhstan border. And my husband is First Nations Cree from Alberta and Montana.
So that's interesting. You said he doesn't garden. You do the gardening. How long have you been gardening?
I've been gardening over 30 years, planting seeds, but I've done landscaping, things like that since I was pretty young.
Okay, so you've been around plants, but because I can't imagine, like, I ask a lot of people, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I would garden with my grandparents." I'm just gonna have to ask, was there any gardening being done in Siberia? Seriously, do people grow plants in Siberia?
I'm sure they do. The thing is it's different terrain. Montana has similar weather to that of Siberia. My grandparents came from that region.
Mm-hmm.
And so they brought their gardening techniques, their vegetable gardening techniques with them. But I actually learned mostly on my own and just trial and error. So I saw them a few times in my young childhood, but I learned most of it on my own and just reading and learning from other gardeners.
And that's what I tell. I just got the question of how can I learn about gardening without going to like a university? I'm like, well, that's the last place you're actually going to learn gardening. But trial and error. So you mentioned Montana because that's where you live, and your zone is zone 3. I'm zone 9B. So zone 3 obviously is much colder. So can you tell us what like an average winter low is, what it is out right now, when the snow starts? Tell us a little bit about the weather that you experience in zone 3, and then we'll talk about how that relates to you gardening.
In zone 3, our growing season is very short. It's considered frost-free dates from June 15th through September 5th or 10th. High elevation gardening is even harder because we have a snow line, and I'm at about a little less than 6,000 feet. And if you're in the valley, which is usually parts of Montana, is about 4,000 feet. That makes it a little bit easier. Missoula is considered more of a green belt. If you go out to the eastern part of the state, you're going to have the hardest time because you'll have a lot of wind and the soil is very, very dry. And so it's extremely difficult to get anything growing out there except grass.
So
grass.
What part of Montana is it west that that you live?
Yeah, I'm in the Southwest. I'm in Pipestone, and so I'm about 17 miles from Butte, between Butte and Bozeman on Interstate 90. I've lived in other parts of Montana, in the tobacco root mountains as well. Native flowers can grow at high elevations at 9,000 feet along the creeks and the lake. And then as you get into the valleys, it's a lot of native grass, very drought tolerant.
Yeah, because so do you get any summer rain, or is it all the precipitation coming in the winter?
Well, normally we have precipitation through the winter. This year is unusual. Today we're actually getting rain, but we're supposed to have snow, and we don't usually get rain in February. We were minus 45 2 3 weeks ago, Fahrenheit, and then now today we were 44, but we're gonna, dip into the 20s and teens, and then we'll have some snow accumulation. Normally we get snow all the way into June. I've had a hard frost and snow in August, and I've lost some vegetables. Usually tomatoes are the ones that suffer from an unexpected hard frost.
Wow. That's I mean, it's a beautiful place, so I could see why people live there. I mean, the pictures, it's just beautiful, but that is tough temperatures and then trying to garden. But you did mention tomatoes. So you do grow tomatoes. Can you explain when do you buy the plants? Do you start the seeds? And what's your process for starting tomatoes, vegetables?
So the vegetables, I like to think, I've never been to like Afghanistan, but we're a very arid climate.
Hmm.
So we have a lot of sun, usually in July, August, September, and that really helps with expediting the growing season for a lot of vegetables. And every year is different. I've had good tomato years and I've had terrible tomato years, and I've had good cucumbers. And the vegetables that really do the best out here that you don't usually lose are usually beans, your pea. They are growing corn in our valley, and that was never like that growing up, but they are doing that more in Montana. And squashes, those type of hardy vegetables. And when I start the seeds, I actually start them. You can throw them in the fall, sometimes even in the winter.
Hmm.
It's a trial and error. I've done it in March and April, and they will germinate on their own. A lot of times, like spinach and lettuce. And I've had lettuce grow in February and March in between snowstorms. And so you just learn what works. And I keep a lot of my bean seed pod on the vine, and the shell of the bean seed pod actually protects the bean, and it kind of makes it hardier. So I'm an heirloom seed grower, and for Montana State University, I'm part of their pollination project. So they come out and they actually will grab different insects, information of what insects, because I attract a lot of variety of insects because I grow a lot of flowers and a lot of vegetables and a lot of native fruits. And so, and I just kind of explore. I've been journaling for decades on how to do things.
Wow. So I mean, I like the idea of just letting it go. It does, it probably insulates it being in the pod and then it just starts growing. Because I didn't even think that you would even attempt tomatoes, but I guess just having that sun and the warmth of those 3 months, just get them up and going. I do want to talk about flowers though, because as much as I love vegetables, I mean, you mentioned flowers, and that's, you post mainly your flowers, uh, and they're just spectacular. And so and I don't even know, I want to hear about what you grow, what's native to where you're at, because I'm trying to think of, okay, what is a flower native to Montana? What pollinators you're attracting and helping out with pollinators, and your process of growing flowers.
First, I want to make it clear, like with the bean pods, the
Mhm.
bean pods are still dry and hard. They're not rotted. So I always make sure that the pods, if you do keep seeds outside, you have to keep them dry, and so you don't get mold.
Mhm.
And so I wanted to clarify that. And then I just drop them on the ground in the spring. But as for flowers, the one thing that I really stress a lot about is people that garden in arid climates like Montana, probably Wyoming and Idaho. It's really important to learn the invasive species because of our climate. Things can grow very well here and just completely encroach on the native grasses and flowers. So I'm lucky where I live along the creek. I've actually been experimenting with some of the seeds that I've collected and have gotten from other growers of other native species that are pretty much up by the lake. I've learned a little bit about Indian paintbrush, which is a real common flower in this state. And you would know more about this, but they tend to need, the seed actually needs a host plant to germinate. So usually you have to have it grow with a certain type of grass or a sedge grass. And it kind of just takes over the host plant. And then that's how they germinate. It's very difficult. I'm still experimenting with it, and I try them in different places along the creek. A lot of the seeds need cold stratification, like columbine. Those are really pretty. Lupin, they prefer to be like kind of scarified. And I tell a lot of people, if you're struggling trying to get seeds to start out here, actually the best medium is gravel, because gravel really attracts the moisture and attracts the heat, the sun, everything for that fluctuation for that seed to break it through its germination. And so it needs the fluctuation. It doesn't need just one cold spell. Sometimes it needs several. Sometimes some seeds might even take a year or two to germinate.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm learning a little more about those. And I do bring some non-native plants, but I keep them pretty much corralled right in my garden area, and I don't let them escape or self-sow, because I don't want it to become an invasive species and spread out in the mountains.
So, do your native plants, the native flowers, do you just place the seeds in the ground, or do you start any inside?
Actually self-sow in the fall and in the winter. I tell a lot of customers in the past, it's just do every 2 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
just throw some more seeds and just, and they'll germinate when they're ready. That seems to work best for me. So I like columbine seeds, they need light to germinate. But a lot of times seeds, you just kind of, just the constant moisture, the fluctuation of temperatures, they kind of get pressed in the soil and then they just germinate on their own. I let nature do all the work. I just toss them and kind of walk away and see what happens. And I kind of am maybe a little lazy gardener. I used to start stuff indoors, and I realized it's actually so much easier to just, just throw the seeds and let nature do it.
I
Even
agree.
annuals.
I call myself a lazy gardener too, because I do that, but it is true. It's like nature, when the soil is warm enough, night temperatures are warm enough, and the plant is ready to germinate, it'll do it on its own. And so anything that can sort of self-sow, I think that's it's great. And a lot of these native plants that you're growing sound like, they're dropping seed down there, and you have a seed bank in there. So yeah, I don't think it's lazy. I think it's working with nature. It's figuring out what works, because some of these plants don't want to even be transplanted. They're more fragile as you move them from plant, from pot to pot.
Like lupin is one that it doesn't transplant very well. So like there was a construction site in Butte, and I went and salvaged some of the native lupins in that site, and I dig them up and I bring them home and I kind of put them in. We have a lot of decomposed granite out here in Montana. Some of the soil is very, very fertile, like the farm. Usually it's the river bottom, creek bottom areas. But when you start getting out up on the flat, the soil's decomposed granite. And so it's even harder. I do use compost, all organic compost. And but like if you transplant lupin, when you do it, you just need to cut the top off and just bury the root. and just keep it moist and kind of shaded, and then it'll get new growth. And so they say, oh, you can't transplant lupin. Well, you can. You just have to kind of have the plant start all over and put all of its energy into that, root system, and then it'll start. You know more than I do about that.
I actually, that's a really good tip. I didn't know about cutting everything off and just allowing the roots to take hold, because I knew it was difficult to transplant, but that's a good tip. Yeah, I was going to ask you about the soils, but you already explained it to me. So decomposed granite. So sounds like you have, where you're at, decent drainage, or does the soil drain too quickly?
It's nice when we have a really good spring. May, June, July should be a really wet season. I mean, even in March and April. I can't think right now the amount of rain we're supposed to get in other certain areas, and everything is changing anyway, so you kind of have to adapt. I mean, I've had some springs back in 2018, 19, and even this past spring was one of my best growing seasons. But then before that, I had one that was it was difficult. You don't realize how much you need that moisture, to really help you. And groundwater is just not, I'll tell you, it does not work as well as rain and creek water. I mean, there's times I'll go down to the creek and get a bucket, and I'll actually use that water. It's better, for the soil. There's a lot more nutrients than groundwater. So.
Yeah, I mean, creek water, it's just the best. I mean, that's probably the purest water. We were talking about how you help with the pollination surveys. What are some common pollinators that you see on your plants, and what is your probably number one recommended plant that for pollinators that you plant in your garden?
So, the extension agency for MSU reached out to me, and I've given them a few insects that have kind of passed on, and they put that. I really don't know a lot about insects. I know I have probably 8 or 9 different types of bees, maybe even more. I mean, they come out and they kind of know more about that. And I'll be honest, I have a hard time remembering a lot of the names and things like that. We have so many different types of butterflies, and a lot of our insects don't even come out until July. And so it's kind of, you get some insects that come out in May and June, and that's really like our wettest season, and everything is just, starting to bloom. And then when you start getting into July and August, that's when everything is out, and it's so warm, and they're just, they do really, really well. We have all different types of moths, and they have hummingbirds, all sorts of, it's a really fortunate thing to have, to bring them in and give them that space.
Do you have pest problems, especially with your vegetables? Anything that really wreaks havoc on them, or is that once again year to year? I know we had an incredibly dry year where we had no rain all winter, and that was the worst year for my vegetable garden because the pests were just crazy. And you're like, hey, what's the correlation? It's just everything was sort of messed up. The beneficials weren't in balance with the predators, but I'm just wondering what pests are going to attack vegetables up there.
So, okay, that's a really good question. I'm sorry you had a hard garden season, because that is really devastating. It's just, it is. It's disheartening to have a season like that. We've actually, I read a lot. I try to read a lot about kind of what is going on in the garden world in Montana, and we're expecting a terrible grasshopper season this year because of our drought. We're at 40% of snowpack in our mountains across Montana. This is the worst we have ever been at. And so we're, it's nerve-wracking, but we still have a few more months to get a lot more snow and hopefully get up there. Well, when that happens and the soil's warm and the decomposed granite soil, is the eggs and those type of things, those grasshoppers survive, and it is miserable. I do have chickens, and I have them run around and eat them and things like that. And if I have to cover things, I will. On a really wet season, you can get some aphids on some lupin, but if I have an infestation, I actually just cut it and toss it. I'm trying to think what else. We have moose and deer. Deer can be problematic, but the deer around here have known me long enough that they don't come into the garden until usually the second week of July, and then I let them come in and they can sniff things or whatever. The moose usually nibble on the branches, and I have a few cats that do kind of keep the rabbits away and things like that. But yeah, grasshoppers I think are one of my most problematic pests.
Wow, I've never had any.
There might be others I just can't think of.
Yeah, I mean, you win the award. I've
Grasshoppers.
never thought of grasshoppers. I mean, I thought, you hear about, actually, where I live, I had a friend whose whole yard and vineyard was eaten up by grasshoppers, but that was like one in every 15-year phenomenon. It's not like a yearly
Yeah,
thing. Um, but yeah, they could be quite devastating. So I think I would just cry if I looked out and saw a whole mass of them.
that's exactly what I've had a few years, and they usually come out and start in July and August. And my garden kind of goes to rest. I mean, what grows in where I live, I have native choke cherries, I have native raspberries. We have Montana native grapes called Valiant grapes, and they are native to a lot of the mountains around Missoula, and I grow those grapes. I have gooseberries, I have different types of currants. And so they don't really, they will eat the leaves and kind of devastate. But my berry garden is really my favorite of all my gardening because I just really enjoy having the berries, the native plants growing. And the grasshoppers don't mess with that too much, but they do mess with the vegetable garden.
Yeah.
And they will eat through and it's just, yeah, it's hard.
Were the berries there? Did they come up on their own, or did you um can you buy native berries there, or did you take cuttings, or did they just pop up on their own?
I actually do a little bit of both. We have native raspberries that grow along the creek. They're a little thinner stem, weaker stem, and the berries are really good, but they're small. And they will spread. And so I'll dig some up and I'll go to a farmer's market and sell some extra plants that I have that, I don't want growing, kind of where we walk and stuff. But I do have I don't bring in other types of raspberries, except I had this one variety that I've had for so long, I don't even remember the name, and they're kind of up on top, so they're not really cross. I don't bring in other, like some people will bring in like blackberries and huckleberries, and
Mhm.
I don't really want cross pollination. I really want to keep the native berries separate and keep them far away, and I haven't had any issues. So I'm not trying to bring in other types of berries because and that's what I ask when sometimes I'll go to the nursery and I just ask questions, to some of them. Tizer Gardens over by Helena is an amazing place to go visit, and you can learn a lot
Mm.
from that garden if anybody's ever interested. You can really learn that they know a lot about propagating and cross pollination of those berries and what you should and shouldn't do.
Yeah, I mean, because we have wild blackberries and they could just go insane. So, um, a lot of these things can outcompete native plants, especially if they get close to a waterway. They could just go boom. So, and it sounds like these are delicious, so there's no need to really plant the non-native ones.
Yeah, so I'm pretty fortunate that way. I try to do as much as I can to keep everything as native as possible, but it's hard on the flower part. I like other species that won't grow out here.
Yeah,
So,
what is it what is a plant that you've tried just for the heck of it and you were surprised that you were successful? And what sort of a plant that you try over and over again because you just want to try growing it and you just you don't really have luck?
well, I like peonies. They do really, really well out here.
Mm.
I like anemones. And so I'm trying different varieties, and some are not for our zone. So I have to wait and I put them in pot. And so those are my favorite type of flowers that I grow. We have over by north of White Sulphur Springs, there's they call it Dame's Rocket, and that can be an invasive species.
Mm-hmm.
And what I try to tell people that grows around a lot of the 1800 mining towns and stuff. And that's more of a seed invasiveness. It's not a root invasiveness.
Mm-hmm.
I do not like root invasive plants. They
Yeah.
really are frustrating. But I do grow a few Dame's Rocket and I don't let it take over. And I do that because the monarch butterflies, because our first bloom starts happening in the end of May, early June. And so I have monarchs that are flying around and they love those. So
Okay.
I do grow a few of those. The phlox that is native to North America. I don't know if it's native to Montana, and so I think it's called prairie. I think they're out of Minnesota, and they carry a lot of native flower seeds. And so I really recommend people to go and get seeds through them. And they're a really good company. You can learn a lot from them. And so I have a lot of native flowers that grow kind of in the draw or the gully.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing how well they do. And it's just like rock. And, they're beautiful. And I'm exploring those types. I'm kind of learning about those. They're not my favorite flowers, but I want them to grow because they are native
Mm-hmm.
to Montana. They're short and small. They're not like the big full flowers, that you get up in the mountains, but they're fun to learn. There's some phlox. I have a white phlox that grows, in rock and, cute.
Yeah, it's actually some of the like when I'm hiking in the Sierras, there's some of the alpine phlox, and it's just like this short mat of little white flowers, and it's the cutest thing.
It is. Yeah, it's not something I put in my main garden because they kind of would, they probably wouldn't survive with the soil type. But I don't think, all the other flowers would just kind of grow over them because they grow so tall.
So you don't do any raised beds. You're just working with the native soil?
Oh yeah, our soil, like I said, is the decomposed
Mm-hmm.
granite is silty where I live. So it was once in the creek bottom. So you can see where the water table has dropped over thousands of years. And so with that, I add compost in the spring and in the fall to just my beds, and I have rocks around them for the flowers.
Mm-hmm.
My garden beds, I do raised beds, and my strawberry beds, my raspberry beds, and I add compost, and I have those
Okay.
in more of a rate. And it's easier because if you just grow it straight, it's just you need a lot more water, and that doesn't make sense to keep watering. And I mulch with leaves and things like that.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering is with
The name.
decomposed granite, you're going to dry so fast. So you add the compost, but having raised beds where you could even amend it even more just uh, prolongs in between when you have to water.
Right. I use just the cottonwood leaves that fall in the fall. I just leave them down there, and then in the spring I rake them up and I just toss them in my beds and I add compost and kind of like the lasagna, you layer them.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you're trying to use what you have there. I mean, you have leaf. It's leaf debris doesn't need to be raked up and removed. Um, people are like want to remove everything, and then they bring in compost. So it's sort of funny that we do that. We're just like, well, let's rake all these leaves, but now I'm going to go buy bags of compost from the grocery or the nursery. We're like, well, you have all these leaves you just moved. And, with some exceptions, of course, if there's diseases or, if it's all black walnut, that might not be the best. But for the most part, yeah, just mix it all in, mix everything in.
Yeah, we just have river birch or alder, actually, is what it's called, and cottonwood and willows, native willows, and the chokecherry leaves. And they they work really well. And I keep a lot of area where I don't touch because I know insects kind of hibernate there from what
Mhm.
I've read and learned. So I don't touch every spot, but in some spots, the ones areas where I kind of go and walk around, I just move the leaves so I don't slip and fall on the ice and,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, when it snows, 'cause
How
slick.
how big is your property?
I have, we live on 3 acres.
Okay.
So I have the garden about an acre and, yeah, it just grows. And
Yeah.
I have 3 berry gardens. I have so many raspberries and I can't, I just want them, so it's fine.
What do you do with the
You know,
raspberries? Do you freeze them? Do you make jams out of them, or do you just eat them like I would?
all 3.
Okay.
I eat them all. Yeah, I love raspberries.
Okay. Yeah.
My favorite.
Yeah, we're not in a good raspberry growing region. I've never grown raspberries, grown blackberries, but I don't know anyone really who grows raspberries. I think one person I know grows raspberries, and it's this one particular one they found. I should get a cutting from it. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, they just don't do well where we're at. So what are you doing now? I mean, are you just because a lot of stuff you've learned to just allow nature to take its course with sowing seeds. So you probably threw down some in the fall before the winter, whatever is dropped down, you're just waiting. Um, and so is there any active gardening going on this moment?
No, but I do have a greenhouse,
Oh,
and because our temperatures warmed up, I did plant of my spinach and lettuce seeds the seeds that I've had for a lot of generations. And they're so used to the cold, and I just have a cold frame in the greenhouse, and so they'll germinate when they're ready. It's really hard because, like, I take care of elderly at an assisted living, and a
mhm.
lot of the ladies, they were in agriculture, and they're just ready to start all these seeds, and they
Mm.
just want to get out and dig, but they can't, and
Oh,
so it's hard. I mean, hard when when you are on Instagram, you're happy everybody's got their garden and things are greening and blooming, and then we have to wait till May and June, and so you know that that's the one drawback, you but I wouldn't trade it. I like the 4 season, and I actually need a break because sometimes gardening can really be strenuous, and take a lot out of you, and it's nice to have a break for at least a couple months.
oh yeah. I mean, even I take a break, and even though we have year-round growing season, I definitely, it's it's still cold. For us Californians, it's still cold and it's wet. Um, but yeah, I mean, the trade-off is you live where it's absolutely gorgeous, and then your flowers are just phenomenal. So that's a trade-off. It's just a short growing season, but wow, it packs a punch. I do have to ask you though, because I have to ask you, I'm sure you get asked this all the time from people outside Montana. You mentioned that you have moose and deer. You have bears, I imagine bobcats. What other animals do you have that visit your property?
Mountain lions.
Yeah.
We've had almost every type of animal except elk. But
Mm.
yeah, we have. And and as I was gonna say, like in your zone, if I moved somewhere else, I would not know how to grow. It's
Mhm.
almost like you have to really live in that zone and learn. But if I went to California or anywhere else, I would not know how to grow. I mean, it just, I wouldn't know, like, all the secrets in your region, and that's kind of how it is when you are in different regions. Everybody knows their region so well, they know the secrets,
Yeah,
you
anyone who
know.
says they know how to
But
grow garden in every zone is wrong, and I say the exact same thing. If you took me and moved me to any different state, even a different zone in California that's, far enough away, I would be lost. I would completely lost. And as, my friend Farmer Fred says is gardening is local. We know, and it could take
yeah,
years to know what to do. And I mean, and I'm sure that's why you like gardening as well, because you're always learning and always experimenting.
exactly. And that really reminds me of a really good point, because my husband, his tribe is from Montana and Alberta. Well, if you go in middle of Alberta, Spruce Grove, their soil is so black and rich that when they grow, they don't water. And so he was shocked, just seeing how I grow. And he's like, he notices that I have to water in the end of July and August. And I usually water 2 to 3 times a week because I do mulch, and as long as I keep the roots moist, I don't overwater the top. I water the base, even if I have to do it by hand. Once in a while, I'll water over top, but very rarely. And he was just shocked. He was like, "Yeah, we grew vegetables and this and that. We never had to water." But I said because this decomposed granite here up north, the soil is the richest you could ever have,
Yeah.
So
Same thing.
every region is.
When I went to England, it dawned on me that they don't have an irrigation system. And then I went to Georgia, and people there don't have an irrigation system. And to me, most of my time is set up is installing the drip irrigation, fixing the drip irrigation, because we have incredibly high calcium carbonate, so it's constantly getting clogged. But that would be great to not have to irrigate.
Yes, I know. I couldn't imagine, but your flowers don't last as long. And that's one of the things that I've learned over time is that, you want as much water as you can. So if you're in a drought year, you need to mimic nature and you need to water May and June. And then once everything starts flowering and it starts fading, you just hold the water, let it go to seed. And the sooner you put it through a drought, the sooner it'll go to seed, and then you can cut it down and start all over. Just keep it green, and sometimes you'll get a second, growth of flowers. Not very often, because then here comes winter, and so. But yeah, I mean, and so that's my method.
So what are you planting anything different than you normally do this year, or what are you excited about most for this upcoming growing season?
Well, I'm trying more my hand in roses.
Oh,
I have done cuttings of some heirloom roses, and I'm just experimenting on what roses will do well. And I have some climbers, and the problem is the deer like to come in and they'll nibble a couple of them down, and I try to keep it fenced away so they can't come in, but it's really difficult, and so it happens, they come in.
so I wasn't even gonna assume that you could grow roses. I thought they would just freeze out, but I know people grow them where there's snow. And do you just let the snow insulate them? Or they just you cut them down and let the snow, and then as the snow melts, they start growing? Or do you have them in pots and you move them somewhere?
No, I have them all in the ground, and I just go to the nursery and get the ones that grow in our zone 3 and I will push zone 4. But shrub roses, they usually recommend cutting them down. And so I've been doing that. I've gotten like a lot of my trees that I planted in my garden space, I got through MSU Extension Agency. And so I really love honeysuckle shrubs, and they're not too bad out here for being invasive. I mean, I get little babies, here and there, but they do really, really well, and I like having them. And MSU kind of endorses that. Like I've gotten lilacs through them, the honeysuckle shrubs, and then like drop more honeysuckle. I have a couple of honeysuckle vines, and the willows. I'm trying to think. The crab apples do really well. We do have apples. It's amazing. You can grow plums and pears. I know people around here that do, and I haven't. I'm going to try plums. I don't have a lot of experience in the big fruit trees. And so, I might go down the road and learn, from elder people that know more about that. I ask a lot of questions, so that's all you got to do.
Well, yeah, and you want to make sure. I mean, it sounds like you have a good nursery there that will, of course, bring in plants that are suited to your zone because there's nothing worse than going to a nursery and seeing plants that aren't going to grow in your in your area.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that my biggest advice for everybody is really research, what you're bringing in to your garden because you don't want a root invasive species. I'm trying to think of, um, like we have wild cress that grows in the creek.
Mm.
And I bring that up and I plant it in the garden, but you have to really keep maintaining it because it's a ground cover. And I put it usually on the edge of my flower garden. So it kind of gives that depth but it just sprawls everywhere and it's edible, but I just have to keep trimming it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of some certain things that just get out of hand, um, from roots and they just off they go. And, I
Like,
mean, like we've got people, say, oh my God, I planted mint in my garden and it's taking over like crazy. And that's one you think, oh, poor mint, everyone likes it. But no, those roots could just go crazy.
yeah, I think the longer your growing season, then you're in big trouble as well. One of the bad things that they grew around Whitehall, you everywhere was this campanella. Oh, I can't
Oh,
stand it.
really?
And it's got bellflowers, and
Uh-huh.
you can. I've actually leave my garden, like I had to dig everything out and I had to wait another season and let it come up and dig deep and get the rhizomes out of there because it just spread.
Is it the
And
ground
that is one of
cover?
the worst.
Is it the one with the small blue flower, like the Portskiansky, which I can never pronounce? Or is it a large flower in bellflower?
It's about the size of a quarter.
Okay. Hmm.
It's purple. Um,
Sounds pretty.
One of our worst. I know some people love it, and we're like, no,
See, we can't
do
grow.
not even look at that flower. It'll propagate when just by looking at it, you'll have it everywhere. Yeah, it's a devastating plant to have.
That's so funny, just different zones because we can't really grow
Um,
the large campanula flowers. I'm just picturing that. I'm like, oh, it sounds so beautiful.
well, like, you've heard what is that one? What's it called? I know, I just had it in my head. It was called eggs or whatever, but I can't think right now.
Not the
But
Matilliha
yeah, there's
poppy.
like no, I grew poppies out here, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't have too big of a problem.
Okay.
But you just gotta, maintain it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they sell. Montanans love their poppies, but I mean, it's not supposed to grow them, but I have a couple here and
Mm.
there, and I just keep it from seeding. But butter and eggs is the one. That's what I'm thinking of. I think
Okay.
it's called butter and eggs. Oh my gosh, that's another one that kind of like, don't bring it in.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
just
I mean,
popped up where you're like,
every
I didn't think, I don't know if you're there.
Oh, I'm here. I was gonna let you continue. I was gonna say every state has their, abundance of invasive species, but it sounds like you're doing a good job of preventing them from getting out of hand where you're at. Um,
Yeah, actually illegal to grow loosestrife. And I know some people have grown that, but that is the most invasive species to grow in Montana, loosestrife.
that actually is incredibly invasive in California too. So I think across the board, it sounds like it's pretty darn invasive. It's beautiful, and I could see why people want it, but yeah, it likes to live in well, pretty much it grows in a lot of different conditions, obviously, but it could take over wetlands, it could take over, it sounds like arid regions in Montana. So yeah, that's a bad one.
I've been reading about people discovering that Japanese knotweed, I think it's called.
Mm.
We don't have that here. I haven't seen it, but I keep an eye on that too. And yeah, so
Yeah, there's a lot. So um your Instagram, do you mind if I give it out? Are you are you're public? Because I see you're followed by some pretty big names like uh um there for your little, for saying that you are like, oh well, I just garden. I'm like, look at who follows you, because I think people are so like in awe of where you grow and how well you do it and how much beauty you bring to, Instagram with your pictures. And, when pictures of your creek, especially in the summertime when you show pictures of the creek, I'm like, oh, I need a creek. Every summer I send my husband uh real estate ads of houses along rivers and lakes because it's so hot and dry. So when I see your creek, I'm like, oh, I just need that in my backyard.
Oh, I know, I know. I was really shocked actually where like you live and how you live. I did not realize, you know, I learn a lot. Like there's a lot of things, like I said, if I moved in and visited, me and my husband came and visit, I mean, I would just have to absorb so much knowledge because I would not have a clue where to start, like what you do, you know? So that's, that's what's so neat about it. It's just everywhere is so different.
Hmm.
And, you
Yeah, and
know,
we're all in awe because we're like, well, that's wow, they're doing that, but it's all just um, trial and error, learning as you go, exploring. So I'm gonna give. Can I give your Instagram handle out? It's Backyard Impressions. So, and that's
yes.
Instagram. And I don't know. Do you have Facebook?
I'm not really much on
Yeah.
Facebook.
Hmm.
I get really, really busy. So I know
Hmm.
like I'm trying to post on Instagram. That's about all I have time to do.
It's tough.
Um, it- I can't keep up with a lot of social media. So Instagram is my favorite. I just love following other gardeners and
Yeah.
like minded people.
Sometimes I realize I'm like, oh my gosh, I've gone this long without posting. And I'm like, how do people do it all the time? But it's sort of like
Yeah.
gardening, you sort of take the break. And then when the inspiration comes and all the flowers and everything, I mean, I'm around beautiful flowers and plants every day at work, but sometimes I'm too busy to even take a, picture. Today I'm like, oh, I'll take a picture of that flower. And then I got interrupted. And I'm like, well, forgot about doing that. So, um, I want to thank you for being on and just giving your time and your expertise in growing in zone 3. And hopefully everyone could follow you on Backyard Impressions and just see your beautiful flowers, your beautiful
I,
property.
I hope we get to meet someday. You're always welcome to come and visit.
That would be great. I've been to Montana
Always.
for a tiny, tiny little bit, but it's an area that I need to explore more because it does um, sound absolutely beautiful. So, yeah, I have to, when I retire one day, I need, I need to go and visit more places in the US. So, until next time, everyone, happy gardening.